Hi, everyone. My name's Alicia Martinez, and I did my research on mitigating accessibility and retention in digital learning. Personally, my master's in library science degree has been completely online based, and this is by design. If you look at the course offerings in Testudo for library science and information studies, the delivery method is pretty evenly split. This design has been great for barriers to education such as location, cost, and time. International students only need internet access to gain an education from an institution of their choice. National students do not need to spend thousands of dollars in rent to live on campus or hundreds of dollars for a parking pass. And I think we all know grad students don't have much free time, so this isn't even about work-life balance. However, remote learning allows students to schedule their studying and education around their current career. It allows the freedom to choose where to get an education, financial freedom, freedom to explore your career, and overall freedom to get an education on your schedule. Now, having access to these opportunities and freedoms can determine if higher education is accessible for individuals. Sometimes remote learning is the only way a person can achieve a higher education. However, everyone has different learning styles that work best for them. So my research was based on the question, how can we improve remote learning practices? I did a solution focused search into increasing online knowledge retention. Though I mostly rely on peer review studies, I was also open to blogs with tips and verifiable sources because I believe in seeking out a multiplicity of professional voices. My studies also come from various places around the world, such as Turkey, Indonesia, and Portugal. My findings are based in case studies and experiments that test for qualitative and quantitative data. So let's ask the question, what causes retention loss? Memory is suggested to rely on clusters of neurons registering patterns. Short-term memory relies on the prefrontal cortex, while long-term memory relies on the hippocampus. Though memories can become long-term through repetition and recall, as we'll review in the next slide. What causes retention loss? Answer that with the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. This Shale study goes over the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which is basically a use it or lose it as a neuroplasticity theory. The theory goes that after you've consumed material information, after 20 minutes, you've lost 50% of retention. After 9 hours, you've lost 40% of the retention. And after 31 days without repetition or revisiting, you've lost 24% of that in retaining that information. And though this is a theory, a 2015 Murray and Drew study was able to replicate this Ebbinghaus curve. Though we can combat the Ebbinghaus curve through retention, through repetition. And this is through a process called cellular consolidation. And this is a neural process where by reactivating memory by repetition, you can strengthen short-term memory into long-term memory. And this is through another like neural process of protein synthesis that encourages neural changes so that short-term memories become long-term memories. And this figure for the rate of retention with repetition is a hypothetical model from the Shale study, but it's still a useful for visualizing that information. Shale also discusses the primacy and recency effect, which is the concept of we usually remember things at the beginning and end of a list. But as we go through a list, we tend to remember things at the beginning of the list first because we're trying to remember all the things that we're subconsciously recalling the first couple of items as we go throughout the rest of the list, trying to remember everything. So the primacy effect is the capacity to remember things at the beginning of the list, as we reviewed, is more likely. And the recency effect is the capacity to remember things at the end of a list, which is still subject to short-term memory because it's going to be the last thing that you visited, and you won't have as much time or opportunity to for your brain to go through that repetition and recall process of remembering it. Shell uses this to advise how to prioritize curriculums. So if you want your students to remember specific things, it's better for the basics and most important information to be at the beginning of a lesson so that students can try to retain and recall all the information in a lesson from the beginning and experience the primacy effect. What also causes retention loss is mental fatigue, um, which is also called the central nervous system fatigue. This is defined as a person's inability to efficiently complete cognitive tasks such as planning, response inhibition, executive attention, sustained attention, goal-directed attention, alternating attention, divided attention, and conflict controlling selective attention. Brains need to rest and be fueled for cognitive function. So sometimes long study sessions are not beneficial to avoid mental fatigue and overstimulation, especially if students are already fatigued, exhausted, and overwhelmed by work, family, commutes, and finances. So one of the solutions to this is microlearning. Microlearning is professionally curated, condensed, usually up to 10 minutes, interactive modules that are available on multiple devices, but it's important that they are available on specifically mobile devices because sometimes it's most accessible for everyone to have in their hand at all times, usually, or at least from the American point of view. Um, this is applying retention through repetition to mobile and micro learning by allowing users the freedom to review materials in short bursts on their own time. The goal is that much bigger concepts are broken down into manageable pieces that fit into a daily schedule. This supports multiple diverse learning styles and has feedback implemented. Um, and the class has had its own experience with microlearning through the Search Better modules, which I personally enjoyed and remember, which kind of adds to this whole presentation. Oh, also in a different study, through a nursing study, um, effectiveness in M-learning, microlearning, mobile learning, as shown to be at least as effective as traditional learning. Now we're going to look at some case studies to show the applications of some possible solutions. Most of these are based in microlearning, but there are some that rely on specific interaction case studies and also best standards for how to treat students. The first case study we're going to go over is the Northern Portugal nursing study, which relies on microlearning, which is again dependent on which is repetitive, manageable, and interactive. So the Northern Portugal nursing study kind of emphasizes how lifelong learning is necessary for nurses to have professional updating because hospitals are constantly improving technology, research, and the workers need to be as updated for the good of public safety and health. It also points out that a lot of staff aren't as accredited as they should be due to work-life balance, financial burdens, lack of resources, and increased workload as barriers. This study uses a validated massive open online course, MOOC, to train 168 nurses on chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. Um, and participants were given a pre and post knowledge test. Now, COPD has become a leading cause of death, and this course is spread across 13 modules. 157 nurses qualified for a certificate for receiving an evaluation score over 50%, and 11 did not complete the training. The average pretest score was 59.97%, and an average post-test score was 84.05%. It was also found that nurses with master's degrees had higher pretest scores. They claimed notably lower dropout scores than other studies and reinforced the idea of repetitive learning, especially for master's graduates. Even though they had more initial knowledge, as shown through the pre-test, doing a course doing a course helps everyone. The next case study that we're doing is the SMAN to Balayage or Balige, a high school in Indonesia. This also relies on microlearning. 180 high school students were separated into three groups to test knowledge retention in different learning environments: traditional classroom, interactive e-module, and an e-module without interactive video. A quote from the study is, multimedia in this context encompasses a wide range of elements such as animations, simulations, instructional tutorials, interactive drills, and practice sessions, and interactive drills and practice sessions, and modules centered around problem solving. Specifically for uh, these classroom applications, the electronic method was used for was used PDFs for the electronic method only, and while the interactive modules had video content, interactive quizzes, and music. And so they said that uh, the interactive model encouraged critical thinking by interacting with the content. And when you interact with the content, you really make it your own and engage. You're kind of forced to engage with it if it's an interactive like model. Anyway, the mean scores for retention evaluation for the multimedia module was 86.31. For the electronic, which again was only PDFs, was 81.47, and the traditional text-based learning method was 78.30. They found most success in the interactive media modules by engaging through a feedback response, through accessibility at any time, and visual learning. The next case study we're going over is also microlearning. This is a university study in the Atlantic region. The authors already believed in the need for personal experiences and online learning through gamified interaction and critical thinking. This is more testing what traits make an educational game better. Specifically, they tested feedback timing as a trait in educational games and also visual hints. This study more focuses on gamification and how we can improve online retention through feedback in interactive games that engage and involve the student in learning. This study cites other game-based studies that result in increased review of course materials, which also goes back to the idea of long-term memory through repetition. Materials, continued play outside of the classroom that shows that like students are engaged with like students are engaged with gaming if they want to engage and continue engaging with that gaming post it being instructional material. And they also used it for drunk driving PSAs, and they did notice a student population go down in drunk driving. So they used that as evidence for changing behavior through gaming, interactive gaming. Games have to be engaging and simple to avoid retention loss through cognitive overload slash mental fatigue that we talked about earlier. Um, so this study split 65 college students into three groups to test these traits in games. The control was a game with no feedback at all. There was a game with detailed feedback, and then there was a game with detailed feedback and visual hints, kind of seeing how much of a guiding hand people need, and if guiding hands in through gaming is actually helpful. And because there's a certain level of um, guidance, you don't want to like lead them through it, but you also don't want them to get stuck and uninterested. Um, a subject's achievement of learning objectives was measured by the individual and total scores of three assessments, the identification assessment, a drawing assessment, and a comprehension assessment, and a total score of all of these. And uh, it was based off of understanding a heart. So the game was interactive module that kind of led them through their different anatomy of not different anatomy, but the anatomy of a heart. Um, they found in the end that delayed elaborate feedback and visual hints in games helped students process information from short-term memory to long-term memory. The next case study uses storytelling as a interactive method. This is a university study from Southeast Turkey. It measures the long-term memory of learned materials through digital storytelling, using 27 primary students in an instructional technology and material design course, using the software Storyboard that, where the students learn material and create stories of their understanding of it to post to Facebook groups. Uh, Students tested higher on material using storyboard learning and were asked for their feedback. And I really like that they were asked for their feedback because that's really like valuing the engagement of the target audience. Of course, we want students to, a part of this is so that students are more engaged. So it's good to ask what would make you more engaged and what do you find engaging about these games and these methods of learning. Students were really like excited to use digital tools and post digitally, and they found the study found that um, by summarizing and creating narratives in their own words, that they were engaging with it for retention because they were also going back to the original material to verify their work, especially since they were like presenting themselves online. Um, I thought that was pretty cool that uh, it becomes a sense of pride what you're putting out online, posting publicly, and that they want to make sure that information is correct when they're presenting themselves online. There's so much misinformation out in the world that I think it's pretty cool that um that people want to feel pride in the work that they put out publicly. Anyway, this uh study kind of goes over how storyboarding as a method develops literacy, practices visuality, and it's also entertaining. And I think these are also things that the kids mentioned themselves. Um, this is the use of multimedia in creating stories, and kids like that there was like freedom in there being low constraints and that they could say what they want. The last study we're going to go over is developing best practices for student support. This is a Delphi study, which is a type of study that consults experts and consolidates all of their answers, because it's basically going to multiple sources and kind of reconfiguring that into a shortened answer. Anyway, this study focuses on the transition phase into higher education as the first year non-traditional online students have higher dropout rates than traditional in-person students. This mentions a published US Department of Education 2009 study that online students performed better than in-person students, but had higher dropout rates. The author Danielle Kish relates this to psychosocial competence, which is to say the psychological and social resources and facilities are connected to mental health, and higher education transitioning online students may not have the same support and guidance isolated from afar and being online. They might not have the support that's kind of inherent interaction and engagement built into being on campus. So this study looks to create best practices to support online students and get them to invest in their education, mostly during their first year. Structured student socialization includes class discussions, videos, and learning materials, in itself promoting a variety of interaction and coursework. Um, this this study consults 27 online education experts to give their recommendations for best practices. The second round is voting on those submissions, and then the third round is ranking the top 8 voted on. These recommendations turned out to be continuous and qualified onboarding, verifying students have computer and internet access, having staff who understand adult learners, having staff with empathy, proactive communication, 24-hour tech support, having reliable support outside of office hours, and active listening. So, what would this application look like? And how can we manifest this in the future? The application of microlearning depends on educational research and use. We kind of have to advocate for ourselves because um, other businesses kind of look up to universities as kind of a model for how to train and how to educate. So higher education institutions have vested interest in serving a wide body of students, student retention, and academic reputation. So why not invest in updated educational technology that best serves students? If online learning is able to be better, then students deserve that education and the chance to be interested in the method that they're doing their education. Students aware of learning methods that work for them can seek out those methods or advocate for their inclusion. It would make sense for higher education institutions to listen to their largest stakeholders. For the conclusion, from my research, online learning can improve mostly through gamification, interaction, and feedback in short, manageable chunks, accessible through mobile learning. This encourages students to be active in their own learning, engages students visually, makes memories out of learning, and gives students accessible freedoms. I originally chose this topic because I felt that academic burnout was not allowing me to retain my education as effectively. And I wondered if this was partially a delivery method, partially a problem with the delivery method and not solely a personal problem. I'm about to graduate, so I planned on seeing if I could implement any of my research into the way I review my notes in the future. I also wanted to see if there were any practices I could advocate for the betterment of education for all students. it's easy to get burnt out as a grad student, and the 2025 Museums Moving Forward report has shown that burnout doesn't really get better in the museum field I've been working in. Um, so what education practices can we improve that people can live accessible and healthier lives? Uh, because you want to avoid, trust me, you want to avoid burnout. Um, even though I've I'd have to do more research. Even though I'd have to do more research into specifically what microlearning apps exist, I don't think that apps are necessarily are are actually like necessary to start microlearning. Personally, I plan on incorporating daily microlearning post grad through curating YouTube videos and reviewing notes from my studies daily. The world is constantly changing, and how we use technology is changing. How organizations are funded is changing. I've learned from my MLIS curriculum that librarianship and cultural heritage fields must shift their roles from solely education to community servantship. This means that professional standards are changing and will continue to change. Longtime employees of any field should not be left behind with outdated information or have to spend thousands for an updated education, especially if they've already spent thousands on an education based in certification and practice. They're obviously trained professionals. I believe parent companies and organizations have the responsibility to keep their staff trained to best standards, whether in practices or mindset. Parent companies should also ensure that trainings are effective and manageable for the sake of application and well-being. And I believe throughout all my research, it's come to the conclusion that microlearning is a solution for this problem. All right, thank you so much.